Uh, so we welcome you. I'm Anna Kogo. I'm multinational engagement lead from BLab Global. I'm here today with Tatiana Menzabal from BLab Global, BNB Program Manager, and we thank you for joining this B Movement Builder talk. We have many companies today joining from different industries, sectors, and many different places from the world. So very happy that this number provide evidence of the interest and the curiosity around the topic of this conversation that will focus around the stakeholder governance topic. But before moving to the conversation and the topic of today, we want also to give you an overview of the B Movement Builder program, a very quick overview, and remembering you that the B Movement Builder program is a part of a wider movement, the B Corp movement, a global network working to create an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system for people and the planet. We want to inform you that after this overview, we will have time for our guest speakers to talk around stakeholder governance, and then all question and answers will be after the conversation. But while we will walk you through this program and the conversation, you are more than welcome to enter your question in the chat so we can answer them after the conversation. The B Movement Builder program is a collaborative coalition of leading multinational companies with the vision of scaling and accelerating global systems change to support long-term value creation for all stakeholders. And B Movement Builder started, it's a young program. It started in the late 2020. The companies that are now in the public phase are Bondwell, Givaudan, Gerdau, and Magalou. And we have two mentors, Danone and Natura. We have more companies in the private phase right now, and we will know them when they graduate to the public phase. And we also received applications that are now under review. The B Movement Builder program is organized around a framework of different webinars, seminars, and individual support that focus on company level actions and collective actions. So through the company level actions, companies have the opportunity to work on their sustainability journey and advance their journey towards sustainability, while joining during the collective, the public phase, the collective actions, in order to work with other companies, B Corps, and peer BNBs to build the moment and improve the collective impact. The areas are the ones that you see here. So 5 areas: commitment and catalyzing the B Corp movement, the stakeholder governance, that is the focus of the conversation of today, disclosure, transparency, and communication, the materiality improvement of the company, and measure and manage impacts. Why company participate in the program? It's a way to prepare for the B Corp certification. So for some companies, this is the goal of the program. It's a way to measure and benchmark their impact, and so company can improve their performance and meet the certification requirements throughout the program. Important to mention that the program is a way to improve trust, credibility, and brand value with internal and external stakeholders. Networking and collective impact. So the collaboration framework is the center of the program. And finally, it's an opportunity to set, monitor, and align the sustainability journey of the company with the sustainable development goals, working closely with our standard management team and the Multinational Standard Advisory Council. The program format is designed through different phases. It started with an application, and when the company is eligible to enter the program, it entered the private phase, working primarily internally with internal stakeholder and in their sustainability journey. When ready, and up to 2 years is the time available to graduate to the public phase, where the company can announce to be a B movement builder and can announce and align external stakeholders. The possible evolutions of the program are to graduate as a mentor or to certify as a group. And I'll pause here. Any questions that you might have on the program, you are welcome to enter in the chat or to reach out to us, and we will provide answers and connect you to our global partners as well. And I give you Tatiana the stage. So
thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna. Thank you for presenting the program structure, the format, and now let's discuss why we are here today. So I want to focus now on the panel that is going to be on the stakeholder governance and why it is a key component of the B Movement Builder program, as well as the B Corp movement. So when we start talking about stakeholder governance, we understand it's a trend topic, and it's needed because ESG and stakeholder capitalism are bringing new factors and stakeholders into investment decisions. And through the BMB program, we are offering a methodology that includes practices and tools for companies to start and or advance on this agenda, as Anna shared, both on the company level action, but also on the collective action, how together we can start amplifying our voice towards stakeholder governance. So here today, we have our 3 special guests that are working with us on this agenda on a diverse environment. They are in different regions with different realities. And our panel is going to be on the unique opportunities and challenges of engaging employees and relevant stakeholders on this large enterprise on a purpose journey. So today we have with us Guy Acha, and he's going to discuss and talk a little bit about what he has been doing and what his work with us. We have Katie Hill, as our Executive Director of BLab Europe and Chief Management Board of BLab Europe, as well as board member of BLab. And we have Michael focusing and helping us on the communication work stream of the BMB, but also on other work streams in the BLab. So the 3 of them, thank you for the 3 of them for joining us on this panel and for being here to discuss this topic with us. I just want to reinforce what Anna has already shared. Please feel free to add your questions into the chat. We will put all of them together to make sure that we have 10 minutes left in the end to make these questions to our specialists here today. So I will start this conversation now. The first question that I have here that we would like to hear from the 3 of you is how should companies start being more proactive on this stakeholder governance agenda? So changing from reactive to stakeholder governance. And if you can, the 3 of you can share with us a little bit, why do companies have to do this and what is the stakeholder governance? It will be great. So Guy, if you can start.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Tati. Happy to be here with you, with Michael and Katie, who I shared the first panel of the Stakeholder Capitalism Forum more than a year ago. So Tati, to your question, I think the answer is societies and companies evolve. I can say that firsthand. 30 years ago, I became responsible for leading the governance and engagement of non-transactional stakeholders with Fortune 500 companies from different segments and geographies. Destiny or coincidence, I built several departments from scratch, also pioneered in creating and chairing non-profit organizations and 2 university departments, one for stakeholder capitalism here in Brussels, Belgium. As dozens of corporate affairs executives listened to my research, our job was presumably avoiding bad surprises and bringing new opportunities. However, some of us always thought to be normal, like our finance, sales, and operations colleagues. We desired to be strategic, involved, and integrated. We had to prove the return on investment without universal metrics. In some cases, I knocked the door of my colleagues from finance to say, "Hi, please help me translate this text into numbers. This could be important for the next budget." The world evolved. Today, the company is making decisions under the influence and pace of millennials, social media, and pressing social, ethical, and environmental issues. All stakeholders, transactional, financial, and non-financial, directly impacted by a company's decision, communication, or silence, or even those that are not part of the company's segment and region, hold the company responsible for various ESG, ethical, moral, behavioral, geopolitical, scientific, among other subjects. Instead of pausing this path, the pandemics and the war accelerated. Trust was not devalued, but boosted. And many companies realized that compliance and ESG metrics are not enough. Trust. Ultimately, the value is trust. We talk, write, demonstrate, and use data and endorsements, but the source counts most. The company became an institution again. Trust can indeed be perceived and measured in many ways. My experience in corporate as a business consultant and as a B-Labs B&B advisor demonstrates in practice that the right path to build consistent trust is to have a unique stakeholder governance framework adaptable to each company. Making stakeholder governance an integral part of the company's decision-making process through careful assessment and planning. Gathering stakeholders, generating data, and making agile and well-informed decisions. Measuring and reporting on the quality and results of the company's decision and action with quantitative and qualitative metrics. And learning and improving future governance, turning lessons from those results into more inclusive and predictable governing processes. Stakeholder governance combines purpose, people, processes, and performance, the 4 Ps. The purpose is to build stakeholders' consistent trust in the company. That is the foundation that allows the company to protect its investments and increase its competitive advantage. Investment protection includes image, regulatory, fiscal, operational, and geopolitics. Competitive advantage impacts attracting and retaining talent, access to financial capital, creating value for customers and consumers, and increasing social capital. Stakeholder governance also aims to make the G of ESG strategic to all stakeholders. 5 years ago, we wouldn't say the societal leadership is now a company's core function, and all stakeholders hold the company accountable. The Edelman Trust Barometer online survey, the last one, the 22nd edition, listened to 36,000 respondents in 28 countries. And here are some takeaways. When considering a job, 60% of employees want their CEO to speak out on controversial issues, they care about. And 80% of the general population want CEOs to be personally visible when discussing public policy with external stakeholders or work their company has done to benefit society. In particular, CEOs are expected to shape conversation and policy on jobs and economy, 76%, wage inequality, 73%, technology and automation, 74%, and global warming and climate change, 68%. 58% buy or advocate for brands based on their beliefs and values. Business needs to step up on social that's a very difficult word, societal issues. While business outscored government by 53 points on competency and 26 points on ethics, respondents believe business is not doing enough to address societal problems, including climate change, economic equality, workforce reskilling, and trustworthy information. Business must lead in breaking the cycle of distrust. Across every single issue, by a huge margin, people want more business engagement, not less. For example, on climate change, 52% say business is not doing enough, while only 9% say it's overstepping. The role and expectation for business has never been clearer, and business must recognize that its societal role is here to stay. Stakeholder governance is the quickest step to pivot away from reactive mode, shifting from crisis management, as you said, to building consistent trust. As in corporate governance, the company has a lot of freedom to choose its stakeholder governance. Here are some examples. A B2B company decided to create squads, small and agile groups formed by the middle management, but with the power to inform and recommend actions to the CEO directly to gain time, skipping their director's approval. The squad has a sponsor, a member of the company's board of directors who has a short and long-term view of the business, thus complementing the more technical and proactive recommendation of the squad. Another example, a leading global technology company has a CEO and chairperson who is generally identified with stakeholder demands. The chairperson, CEO, empowers his leadership team and experts to decide and implement actions without taking everything for his approval. He created an environment of trust where his team could have different views on addressing new issues brought by stakeholders or even within the company. In his company, no one feels threatened for having gone in a particular direction. Another one, a centenary company, hierarchical, and whose segment is highly regulated, decided to design and implement a permanent and multi-departmental committee for stakeholder governance. In the beginning, the committee was led by a C-suite. Still over time, the external consultant demonstrated that a rotating leadership could be more advantageous for the company by allowing tremendous encouragement of participants to expand the possibilities, learn more about the specialties of each member, and train new leaders. The committee's environment, which was already one of respect and trust, expanded its contribution to the company. One of the rotating leaders made a list of top talents precisely for his ability to bring visions together on the committee. One of the problems faced by the company related to an impacted community was solved because the committee's leader understood the community leader, and what was before a problem ended up becoming an opportunity. We also listened to board members, CEOs, and the C-suite, and here are their questions. Number one, there are too many ESG and stakeholder details. What we need is a concise and actionable information. Second, we cannot include more people in the board responding to the CEO or including in the leadership team because we need focus. But we also need to make well-informed decisions. So we need to count on a task force, a working group, or a permanent committee of stakeholder governance. Third, stakeholders cannot wait too long. Otherwise, our delay in communicating will be interpreted as an answer. So we need real-time information and advice. Fourth, we need to move from ad hoc decisions to a roadmap. Our company needs consistency to build trust. And the last one, our governance framework, stakeholder governance framework, is helping CEOs and the C-suite deal with all those practical questions. And what they are saying is without breaking the bank and without disrupting the company's culture. So back to you, Tati.
Thank you, Guy. I think it was very important to hear the importance of consistency to build trust, about the importance of having a framework, all the expectations on the companies, on the CEO. I would love to hear also Michael's and Katie's opinion on how companies should engage on this agenda.
Sure. So thank you. I think the reason that people decided to join to listen today is because they believe that change is possible and in fact required. And I think the stakeholder governance framework that Guy described for us is absolutely about change. And what I would add to that is that while the stakeholder governance provides the rules, sort of the how to, what's also needed in implementing urgently the need for stakeholder governance is the change of the cultural norms. What a company, not only how a company operates, but what is their communication platforms? What's the frequency? How transparent? Are the communications unidirectional or are they conversational? In addition to all of the considerations for who's involved in those conversations. So I think the idea that change is required is the starting point. And that has a lot of significant implications in communications. Corporate culture evolves based on the desire of where the leadership wants to take the organization. And traditionally, most multinational companies have been largely focused on financial objectives, financial outcomes. And with that being the traditional focus, we have an opportunity now with stakeholder governance to consider a much broader framework of stakeholders to engage, but that requires a different set of skills from a communications perspective. And how companies communicate both internally and externally has to be reflective of their spirit to be inclusive, to include diverse voices that often may not be aligned initially with a company's objectives. But I would just end my thoughts with what are the hallmarks? What are the things that we should be looking for when implementing stakeholder governance? And those are transparency in communications, humanism in how companies speak to their employees and how they expect to be, how they treat their external stakeholders. The spirit of co-creation, the idea that no company can do it alone or accomplish its objectives without friends and partners. And all of that leads to a reflection in what a company says and how it does that is more diverse and more inclusive. There's also an implication on frequency of communication. As I mentioned, making sure that it's not unidirectional, but that it's conversational. And it does take, it requires change in how what I'll call traditional companies think, and how traditional companies govern, but also how traditional companies communicate. And, my experience having led an organization that joined the B movement many years ago and ultimately became certified as the largest B Corp in the world at the time, all of those things were required. And it was a learning journey. So the key thing, most important, is to be open to the idea of what we're going to do in the future is quite different than what we've done in the past if we want a different outcome. Katie, any thoughts to add on that?
Yeah, thank you. That was fun. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael and Guy. And lovely to see so many people from all across the world, because this is an agenda that works everywhere. It's not just in one part of the world, which is key. And maybe just to define a stakeholder for a moment, because what's at stake here? Like the pun, there's a lot at stake, because really any one or place or thing that is affected by the decisions of a company has a stake in that company and becomes a stakeholder. And so really for a company, first thing actually they have to do is almost map out who are the stakeholders, or what are the stakeholders. Sometimes it might be the future generations could be a real stakeholder, or it could be the land across the field, or it could be the digital community that is part of their community and their orbit and are affected by the decisions they take. So, we're really talking about a very wide range of potential stakeholders, and it's down to the company to work out which are the ones that are most affected. But I think just also to lodge this into the B Corp movement and where this fits is, if you any of you who've gone through the B impact assessment, you'll see that it's a very kind of comprehensive, holistic assessment of a company, and it looks at all the impacts that a company could be making on its key stakeholders. So that's on its employees and on its suppliers and on the environment and on its customers, and it looks obviously at how a company is governed. So the hook here between why stakeholder governance is so critical is because it is actually at the core of what makes a company really full of the best intentions to be as positive in its impact as it can be. I think you mentioned at the beginning, Tati, to say what's this unique opportunity we have and the unique kind of moment we're in. And I think as Michael and Guy both said, I mean, frankly, we have no choice. These companies have to step up. We have existential, critical situations which governments and civil society cannot and will not solve on their own, and business, frankly, is a far more wealthier member of the triad who can help solve these problems. So, frankly, companies have such a critical role. They can make or break our challenges, and we obviously hope and believe that most of them want to make the challenges ones that they can overcome. And then, obviously, the counterpart to that, as Michael was saying, actually society expects the culture and the norms of today are now asking business, what are you doing to help us? You see it everywhere. You see it whether it's school children or the pensioners or all of us in between who are saying, what's your company doing to help us make this world work? We've got a stake in this world. You've got a stake in this world. You're affecting it, so you should be part of it. So society is not going to let them off the hook. So there's a sort of call and there's a push and a pull. I think obviously, and we might get into this a little bit later, but it clearly benefits companies. Actually, there's so much evidence that if you run a company in the interest of all of those who are affected by it, you're much more likely to be in that business for longer, and you're not likely to find yourself out of business. Maybe longer term, there are some discussions about what investment you have to make before you reap those benefits, but it's clear that this is a win-win situation. And then I think, actually, interestingly, I think most leaders, most teams, most new recruits coming into a business, they actually want to work on a multiple range of challenges. And if you're just working on one dimension to make profit, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound massively interesting. And I think, you might be very good at it, but if you could add another couple of dimensions in, genuinely, I think you would probably find the job a lot more interesting as well. So there's a natural instinct that people are wanting to think, how can I solve this sort of Rubik's Cube of puzzles that we are in, that where it really is what we've all got to do if we're in business. There's some really unique opportunities to lift this game of stakeholder governance. I think somebody in B Lab very kindly once did some research about how many times the words stakeholder governance came up in the media between 2000 and 2018. And it was they counted about 500 times. Might sound a lot, but by the time you got to 2019, the first half of 2019, it had way exceeded the 500 in just that. It was something of a tipping point. There was a real momentum around this whole agenda, and everyone was talking about it, upending shareholder primacy, stakeholders taking the reins, all of these discussions. And actually what you see around the world is a lot of initiatives now trying to help companies actually not be reactive, but proactively engage. And so in the EU, where I'm most engaged at the moment, is some legislation that's on the books to try and push for changing the duties of directors. And I can talk more if anyone's interested in this in further detail, but it's actually fundamental because it's going to change what actually happens in the boardroom. They will have to sort of really answer the question. So what are you doing for your stakeholders? How are you considering their interests? And what are you doing about trading off some of these interests when it isn't clear? And clearly there will be some trade-offs. It can't be that you will always be able to satisfy everyone. There will be some prioritization. And directors will, we hope, be asked to explain how they've made those decisions and why they've made them. And good judgment is what's required, and investigation and a clear connection and communication, as Michael was saying, a two-way conversation with those stakeholders. So that's happening in the EU. At the UK, we have a Companies Act, which really needs one word changing. At the moment, you're allowed to consider the interests of your behaviour on all stakeholders. You might choose to do so, and really we want to change the word might and put must in there. I think it's more technical and complicated than that, but broadly that's what we're trying to do. And then you see in Brazil what's going on in the stock exchange, the São Paulo Stock Exchange, where you've actually got a wonderful example where there's now a corporate responsibility index, and companies who are going to be listed on that index will have had to have gone through some of the questions of the B impact assessment, which are basically asking what's your commitment to stakeholder governance. And then lastly, in the US, we have the SEC, who are now really moving forward in their latest white paper on what their sort of proposal is for corporate governance, which will have a much greater role for the voice of stakeholders. So this is happening in different countries, and I'm sure anyone in the chat in other places, please, fill us in with other countries and other initiatives that are going on. So it's a real global momentum. I think there's a real risk if we don't nail this and we don't grasp it by the horns, as they say, that actually what will happen is the ESG movement will just become really greenwashing. It won't nail what we need to do. We need ESG investment. We need the capital to flow really to solve the problems that we've got, whether societal or environmental, or very often both. And if we don't really make it meaningful, it won't do that job. And we have huge capital into ESG. It's doubled in the period over the COVID 2 years of COVID. ESG investment doubled in size. So we need to make sure we use that really well. And this feels like the lens through which it needs to be directed. So yeah, I think I'll stop there because I think we might be going to have some more questions with other things, but it's an exciting agenda. And I hope people on the call are feeling that this is something they really want to engage in. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Michael. It's amazing to see the momentum, the numbers that you shared, Katie, and all the expectations regarding companies' role, CEOs' role. It's obvious, I think, for everybody that we are living this change, that the cultural shift is happening right now. And it was great to hear what is stakeholder governance, why we are talking about stakeholder governance. And Katie, you mentioned it very briefly, but I would like us now to go a little bit deeper on, in a very practical way, what companies will get in return. So what is the advantage? I understand that we're talking about future generations, about including stakeholders, but what are the advantages that we have when companies move from this reactive to this stakeholder governance?
Could I jump back in? Oh, Michael, please, you go.
I'll jump in on that because generally, I mean, many of these are reputation-based, or I'll start with those, at least with my lens through communications and culture. But clearly, I mean, in summary, what company would not enjoy a better reputation, increased credibility, and more applicants for every job, and more qualified applicants for every job, and better retention among your current employees? So those are the three benefits I've experienced that I wanted to share first. I mean, one of the greatest, and I'll start on the threat side, because I don't think we've talked much about de-risking, but de-risking a business is a key benefit. The more you know the better you're able to address problems before they become significant problems, and significant problems before they evolve to crises. So, I do a lot of crisis management work, and the best crisis is the crisis you avoid. So de-risking is a part of it. But as everyone knows, one of the greatest risks or threats to a company is in that moment of crisis when your reputation is under fire. And stakeholder governance leads to a better, unquestionably better de-risking of a company. And that will reduce the likelihood of the type of crisis that comes from anything, frankly, that's covered by governance, because it'll be a better informed company, a better informed process. Unto stakeholder governance itself, it leads to better reputation, which is defined basically as what other people are thinking and saying about you. And that includes your employees. And organizations, and that includes governments and regulators, and gives them more incentive or less hesitance to endorse a product, a service, or a company, or way of doing business in which you, as a leader in stakeholder governance, are pioneering. So a better reputation leads to greater interest in lots of different ways. And then lastly, on the employee side, it's higher levels of engagement. If you're doing your employee engagement surveys every year or two, no question that will go up. The more you truly engage in a conversation with employees and treat them as a stakeholder with proper governance, the greater they're going to feel appreciated, which leads to obviously greater retention, which is a cost saving. And that in turn leads to easier recruitment. So I'll pause there, but I think there's unquestionable benefits that I've seen firsthand. And in the 2 years that I've worked with the B Movement Builder companies, those 6 that you saw previously, plus others in the private phase, they've experienced that as well. So happy to share more about that if anyone cares to.
So Tati, Michael and Katie brought a lot of facts and points about what makes stakeholder governance critical. And I think, in my opinion, the objective is always to generate the consistent trust of stakeholders to obtain 3 significant gains. One is protect investments. The second is increase competitive advantage. And the third is to make the ESG, the G of ESG, strategic. In general, the company should consider these 3 factors, to build its long-term strategy and company-wide umbrella. They have to think about who are the relevant stakeholders, the financial and non-financial stakeholders, and the transactional and non-transactional aspects of all relationships. In general, companies tend to include only those financial stakeholders, having difficulties in identifying those whose impact on P&L is still intangible. Second, what are the significant impacts of their decisions and communications for relevant stakeholders? There are material and certainty impacts. Third, what is the investment and how to measure the return? The company must combine these 3 elements with the company-wide objectives and unique factors, such as specific issues, projects, geographies, business divisions, etc. From the strategy and investment definition, the company chooses the people and processes involved. Let's talk about investment protection. The main risks are image, as Michael just pointed out, regulatory. Katie brought the attention of us on the EU proposal directive on sustainable governance, operational, fiscal, and geopolitics. A fundamental note here, as the stakeholders are connected today, one risk can multiply into many others. I'm going to tell a case in the newspapers, and all I know is public information. Disney had decided on a policy of LGBTQ plus inclusion long ago. However, the company was slow to comment on a bill from Florida on this issue that gained enormous proportions, generated divisions between conservatives and liberals, and had the repercussions in the USA and the world. Since the company was slow to comment, stakeholders perceived that they were pro-status quo. So employees then protested and embraced the park, demonstrating that the company had to position itself at its highest leadership level. The company did it. And by doing that, however, Disney had to displease stakeholders, one of whom was proposing the legislation and governing Florida. As a result, the government withdrew a benefit that Disney had had since the founding of Disney World. A few days after this event, Disney terminated the contract of its VP of Corporate Affairs and split the area into several specialized departments. From the perspective of stakeholder governance, what matters is how, if Disney had a permanent committee, preferably with rotating leadership, multi-departmental, with specialists, structured and agile enough to make an advice and well-informed advice for inclusive decision-makings, plus learnings from other previous analogous cases, maybe this will not happen in that sequence. Stakeholder governance is about decisions and about how to make better ones in the emerging era of stakeholder capitalism. It's becoming risky, as Katie said, and ethically questionable for companies themselves, as well as for their stakeholders, to make decisions based solely on the bottom line and the short term. Another real-world example: on Christmas Eve 2019, a man named Mark Eugenio ran out of gas somewhere near Cakamas, Oregon. He was also out of money. His bank, the US bank, had put a hold on most of his 1,000 paycheck he deposited 2 days before. And he had already spent hours at the branch office unexcessively pledging to have the funds released so he could buy Christmas gifts for his children. From the gas station, Eugenio dialed the bank's toll-free number and reached Emily James, a senior customer service officer at the call center that happened to be near Eugenio's location. After an hour of trying to get the funds released so he could make an ATM withdrawal at the gas station, James asked her supervisor for permission to simply drive 20 minutes on her break to lend Eugenio $20 of her own money so he could put some gas in his tank and get home to his family. Her supervisor, Abigail Gilbert, told her to go ahead. It was a happy ending for Eugenio, but not for Emily James and Abigail Gilbert. Both were fired by the US Bank regional manager for failing to comply with the bank's written policies, which did not allow call center workers to meet consumers. It's at this point, when I am telling this story, that most people simply nod in understanding. Of course they were fired. They broke the company's rules. 5 years ago, this probably would have been the end of this story, but it was just the beginning. It was a story that refused to die. US Bank is created on social media, and New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof, after trying unsuccessfully to reach its CEO, Andrew Cecere, for comment, published a version of events that reflected terribly on the company. Soon the story was appearing in newspapers in the United Kingdom, and soon after that, Cecere, the CEO, released a public statement vowing, "I will fix this." US Bank offered James her job back, but she declined. She later accepted a position with a credit union in California, which generated another round of bad publicity for the bank. I first heard of the US Bank episode when I was living in Belgium, working as the head of stakeholder capitalism at the Brussels Diplomatic Academy there. I was excited to learn that the firing of a low-level bank employee in Oregon had become an issue significant enough to compel a public statement from the CEO. And then to learn that this employee had spurned the CEO's peace offering and received a better offer elsewhere. It was a case of stakeholder interests, both the customers and the employees, taking precedence over a company's internal policy. The US bank case shows how fast the world is changing and how unprepared many companies are for what's already happening. It's a case of a company using an outdated playbook designed for transactional relationship, the simple exchange of money for goods or service within a given set of rules, in a world that increasingly demands more organic relationships from companies, focused on a fuller set of human needs.
Thank you, Guy.
So
yeah.
This story is very clear, and I think I made my point.
Very straight to the point. And I will just do this quick talk here because I'm being aware of time. So I will still encourage you all here watching us today on this webinar to share your thoughts or your questions in the chat so we can talk to you after we finish this discussion. But Katie, I would love to hear from you what companies will get in return. So we heard from Michael, we heard practical examples that Guy brought us, and I think it was very straight to the point. But besides hearing from you, Katie, what companies will get in return, I think we can also enter the next question, that is understanding, as Guy shared a little bit of it, the key for all stakeholders. And in a very practical way, what can we do to make it go live? So what companies should start doing right now to implement everything that we are sharing? So Katie, if you can start answering the previous question and starting this new one. Yes,
sure. And actually, I think they do run together very well, because actually what benefits the company probably benefits the stakeholders and vice versa. So it's a nice natural segue anyway. And I mean, there are several sources of evidence that show that actually if you run the company well, if you're a well-governed company, you're actually likely to outperform your other your competitors. And so Hermes actually has done this study which shows that on average they outperform their competitors, companies that are well-governed, by 30 basis points a month, which actually, if you think of the lifetime of most companies, is particularly public companies, is possibly in the region of 50 years, 20, 50 years. You know, that's a lot of incremental value you're getting from running the company well. But I mean, that's just, I think, has been in the box of standard governance. But now we're looking at something which is much more integrated and complete and well-rounded as sort of full stakeholder governance. I mean, if we think of employees as probably one of the most, employees and suppliers feel like sort of core to the business, and employees are definitely voting with their feet. We see exactly what they're expecting, and they're also renowned to be prepared to take a pay cut to work for a company that's really transparent and full of purpose and lives and breathes that. I think the other thing that from the company's point of view is that now we're seeing a whole range of new opportunities to get involved in partnerships, collective action, working with governments, being part of solution finders. Innovation is now having to be on everybody's front of mouth, because they have to think about what can we do to come up with solutions that are needed for today's issues. And so I think companies that are well grounded in what stakeholders are looking for are much more likely to find good partners and good actions to be engaged in and be at the forefront of innovation. So I think there's some great examples of this. And actually, as those of you who read Mariana Mazzucato, a wonderful Italian Canadian economist who talks a lot about this kind of collaborative action, that basically we've got to go into partnership and solve these problems together, business and government and civil society. The whole model is based on that. I think in terms of then your next point about how do we actually get people into action, well, I do think case studies do help hugely, because this is so bespoke. There's no, and Guy, you're the expert on this, but my sense is that there is no one model that fits all. You're having to bespoke, pre-design everything around what are the company's main stakeholders, where are they operating, how is the culture already embedded, what are the mechanisms. And so we actually, as part of the interdependence coalition we built around our EU lobbying, we've interviewed and had sort of coffee conversations with a number of different B Corps to ask them about their stakeholder governance. How does it play out? How do they think about the stakeholders' interests? What do they do to motivate different parts of the business to really focus on it? And one of the key things is actually to set targets for the business around those stakeholders' interests. So if they're achieving particular outcomes or looking to achieve particular outcomes related to stakeholders' interests, that those are reflected in their performance assessment and maybe in their bonuses. And we see companies like Innocent have done that with great effect. So you don't disconnect the incentive scheme from the purpose and the governance that you want to see to support stakeholders. And I think that's going to be critical. So do have a look, anyone, on the case studies. I'll put it in the chat, the link to some different companies, whether it's Illy Cafe or Organic Basics, who've done a huge amount with their suppliers to really understand what do they need to be able to supply the cotton they need in a really effective way. And there's many, many other examples, and I'm sure people on the call here have also had their experience. So it's no one size fits all, but we can all learn from each other, and we should try to do so with real curiosity and interest. I'll pass it over to Michael, shall I? Thank you.
Sure. So, I mean, I think in terms of practical, real examples, Katie, you touched on this a bit. When in the supplier model, when a supplier understands that more than price matters to their customer, they will approach problems differently. They will approach problems that they will present solutions, rather, that seek to differentiate them from their customers, from their competitors, sorry, to lock up longer term, more favorable relationships. So what can those non-financial, non-price driven benefits be? They could be novel processes that may reduce greenhouse gas. They can be use of creation or development of a new ingredient that may be bio-based instead of petro-based. So I think there are lots of types of ways of engaging and companies benefiting from changing that dialogue with their suppliers, that this type of governance and communications and culture change that we're talking about extend. And once a company starts to realize that, and it trickles down into the supplier relationships or other partners that make a business work, the payback is X-fold, not only in terms of the financial metrics, but all of the other reputational credibility and de-risking benefits that have been previously mentioned. Katie, anything to add, or Guy on that?
To you, Guy.
No, I think we are making the case that the why is clear. We have to do it. There is no other option. The how is a stakeholder governance, and the way we do it is, as Katie stressed importantly, that it's a framework. There is no one size fits all. And we can say from the example of the B&B program that some companies are understanding the impact and they are doing this business case, following the framework, but adapting to each company, and that's working. And what I can say is that what we see is this feeling that finally we are moving from a department trying to do everything, to manage everything, and to share with other, executives and other specialists and try to do something collectively, but structured, not only collective, but structured.
I'm jumping in as our time is getting close to an hour to ask if there are any questions. We know it's a it's something really new and innovative. So it could be that questions will come tomorrow or in the few next days. And so we are more than welcome to answer if you want to reach us or if you want to reach our global partners around anything that you want to discover more. And so for now, I don't see question coming. So I'll take that everything is clear.
I think it's a lot to digest, right? Lots of information to digest.
Yes. And I start to say thank you to Katie Hill, Guy Atia, and Michael Neward, and Tatiana as well. And this webinar was recorded, so we are happy to share it with you. And thank you again for joining. And we hope to hear from you, and please send us any feedback, any question, and hope you to see all of you soon in another webinar.
Yeah, thank you for our speakers, our guests, and for all of you who attended this meeting today. Please feel free to reach us to discuss more about all of this. A lot of things to talk about, just 1 hour, so we'll be here if you need. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Katie, Michael, and Guy for being here.
Thank you,
everyone. Be safe, be well.
Ditto.